Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs and another edition of Studio Albums Ranked. And today I have a very special guest, Mr. Larry Graves from Canadian Studmuffin. Larry, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And today we are going to be ranking the albums, the studio albums of the wonderful, wonderful American band Sparks. They have about 26, 27 studio albums, depending on how you count it. So rather than doing the whole lot, we're going to be doing a top 10. This was really difficult to narrow it down because really there is no such thing to me anyway as a bad Sparks album.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
Yep. I
So,
mean, I would say that there's been disappointments, you
mm,
know, and maybe at the time certain albums came out. I wouldn't say they were bad, but yeah, they were disappointing and a letdown. But then years later, you kind of go back to it, and it's like, you know what? I actually like this album a lot.
yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get into it and we'll start you off, Larry, with your number 10.
Well, my number 10, I had to include something from the very early years. So I think their debut and A Woofer and Tweeter's Clothing, I don't favor one over the other. I think they're both great albums, but uh probably one of my favorite songs is Whippings and Apologies. So I had to go with A Woofer and Tweeter's Clothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, those two early records are really good. The only problem for me with those two records is the sound quality is not brilliant on them.
Yeah. And also with I think the last two or three songs, it's sped up on the CD.
Mm,
There's some kind of issue where, and they've never fixed it yet.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you
But
wonder who owns the rights to those early albums too.
yeah, it would be nice to have like a Sparks box set. It'd be
Yeah.
expensive though, but
It would be really hard too because they've been on so many different record
yeah,
labels over their
yeah,
career.
yeah.
Well,
But
my
yeah, I remember I'd bought Kimono My House and Propaganda, maybe Indiscreet. And then I went back and I bought the first two albums together at the same time. And I enjoyed Spark like the debut right away, right? It was
yeah.
nothing, but this was weird on the first listen. It's like, I think I almost disliked it. It took a while to warm up to it, but I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah. Um I'm trying to think of it. They actually I saw them last year in concert and they actually played a song off that
Yep.
album.
So
It
did
was
I. Yep.
was it Beaver
Beaver
Lindy?
Lindy. Yeah.
Yeah. Um which is wonderful to see them delving that far back into their catalog for
Yeah.
material
Yeah.
for their concerts.
Yeah.
My number 10 is going to be their album from 1994, which is Gratuitous Sax and Senseless Violins. This was a bit of a comeback for them. They hadn't done an album in, I think, 6 years or something, after interior design had just totally sort of sunk without trace.
Yeah.
And this album ended up being really, really big in Europe,
Yeah.
particularly in Germany, I believe. It's got, the wonderful When Do I Get to Sing My Way? This is their really sort of, Euro disco kind of sound.
Yeah.
Um, the one that I was like, I remember I've got a disc of like a bunch of Sparks albums, like an MP3 format that I play in the car, in the CD
Hmm.
player in the car. And I remember my son absolutely cracking up to the song, I Thought I Told You to Wait in the Car.
Yeah. I'm
I
cracking
mean,
up now.
yeah,
Yeah.
but there's so many good songs on this album. It's just probably I like the Euro disco sound, but it's probably not my favorite Spark sound. But
Yeah.
just the
Yeah.
quality of the songs come through on this album, I think that pushes it into my top 10. When I
Yeah.
Kiss You, I hear Charlie Parker playing and
Yeah, I love
hear
that
no
one.
evil, see no evil, speak no evil. Frankly, Scarlet, I don't give a damn. You
Yeah.
know, there's a lot of really good songs on this album. So that's why I'm
Yeah.
ranking that one as my number 10.
Yeah. Okay. All right. My number 9 is a more recent one. And yeah, I love a steady drip, 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 probably almost as much. But between the two, I'm going with Hippopotamus right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even recently, like there's some songs you kind of I wouldn't say ignore, but you kind of don't love right away. And recently it's been yeah, The Amazing Mr. Repeat. I love that song. Like,
Mm.
yeah. But so many great ones. Scandinavian Scandinavian design, missionary position. It's and this of course went top 7 in the UK and
Yeah.
yeah. And almost like a propaganda kind of feel to the cover
Yeah.
kind of idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm also going to go for a fairly recent one for my number 9. And that is Exotic Creatures of the Deep from
Yep.
2008. I love the sound of this record. Um, you know, it's got some wonderful songs on it too, like Good Morning. I Can't Believe You'd Fall for All the Crap in This Song. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Let the Monkey Drive, Lighten Up Morrissey. I mean, has ever a better piece of advice been given in a song?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just lighten up, Morrissey.
And Strange Animals, awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But it's got a really wonderful sound. I mean, they were into their, they were self-producing by this stage, Russell was doing all the engineering and the mixing and that sort of thing.
Yep.
And they really had become a fully self-sustained unit by this stage. But I love this has got a real sort of, chamber pop kind of feel to it, which I really, really like. So yeah, that's my number 9 is
Yep.
Exotic Creatures of the Deep.
10, 9. So my number 8, I think when this album came out, some fans, because they would sometimes change almost album by album. And, some fans obviously are going to be disappointed with the change, but I loved it right away. And except for the production, I guess. But Sparks' Big Beat.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I don't like about it is the production I wish was a little better. But I love all the songs. And Confusion is probably my favorite on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a good album. And as I say, it is a different production. They'd gone back to the US by this stage after being in the UK for a few years. And they were using sort of session musos in the UK, in the
Yeah.
US, and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. They were going for a different sound with that one. They
Yeah.
were trying to get away from that sort of arty kind of sound that they had in those 3 UK albums. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's some really good songs on there. Big Boy, I think, is a wonderful single.
Yeah.
And Fill Her Up.
Yeah. Throw her away and get a new one.
Yeah. Well, my number 8 is your number 9, which is Hippopotamus.
Yeah.
When this came out, it just instantly hit me that this was,
Yeah.
such a good album. Um, I mean, the title track was the first thing that I heard off this. It was sort of released as an advanced single. Um, but you've got wonderful things like Edith Piaf said it better than me. Um, What the Hell Is It This Time? That's a really, really great
Yeah.
song.
Yeah.
Um, and then you've got to go for, I mean, it's a long title, but those humorous titles that they would come up with for their songs is, so tell me, Mrs. Lincoln, aside from
Yeah.
that, how was the play? Um, but yeah, it's a really great, and to me, this album and the next one really are a case of like they were delving into all the different styles that they'd done throughout their career by this stage. So,
Yeah.
they'd have some of the art pop on there, they'd have some of the glam rock on there, they'd have some of the Euro disco on there, all the different kind of sounds, some of the new wave. Um, Yeah. So it's a wonderful, wonderful album. If you haven't listened to some of these later edition Sparks albums, I definitely recommend them, especially this one in a steady drip, drip, drip. But yeah, I mean, really, it's a latter sort of career renaissance that they're having at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. My number seven, once again, they changed their sound. I get maybe trying to sell records, but that didn't work. And it is introducing Sparks.
Mm,
And you know, back in the 70s, I had a friend who supposedly hated Sparks, right? He was a big Paul McCartney fan. And when this came out, he ended up buying it.
yeah,
Because it's so different, right? It's more commercial and uh yeah, I loved it right away, even though it was such a another drastic change, right?
yeah,
Yeah. And the production is really good too. The only thing when this came out, I was really confused with introducing Sparks.
yeah.
This is their seventh album.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's their first and it was their,
Yeah.
well, wasn't even their first in the US. I think it
No.
was their second on
Yeah.
Columbia.
On
But
Columbia. Yeah.
Big Beat was on Columbia there, but it was on Ireland in the UK.
Yeah.
So whereas this one was on Columbia or CBS everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, it's an odd title, but it's an underrated album in their catalog, I think.
Yeah.
My number seven is going to be Womp That Sucker from 1981. This is them very much getting into their new wave sound, which they would sort of do for the next sort of three, four albums. And you know, um that really is right up my alley because new wave music was the first music I ever got into as a kid. So,
Yeah.
that kind of sound is always going to really appeal to me. It starts off with the brilliant Tips for Teens. Absolutely love it. Funny Face is wonderful. The Willies, what a
Yeah. Yeah.
wonderfully silly song that is.
Yeah.
Um, and it closes with Wacky Women. And I mean, if there's a more Spark song than Wacky Women, I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
of course, this was, they'd built up this new band that they had for this one
Yep.
by this stage, including David Kendrick on drums, who would end up
Yep.
going to play for Devo later on. So,
Yep.
so yeah, that's my number seven, Womp That Sucker.
Yep. Well, my number six is kind of similar because it's the same era.
Mm.
Angst in My Pants. Um, yeah, I remember seeing this album cover in the record store and just laughing out loud. And I saw them in Toronto in 1982, and for the encore, they came out as bride and groom, and yeah. And one of my favorite songs, "The Decline and Fall of Me," is on this album, and "Mustache," of course, "I Predict," and "Angst in My Pants." Yeah, just the only song I'm not crazy about is Tarzan and Jane, but otherwise, great album.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll have a little more to say on that shortly, but my number six is going to be A Steady Drip, Drip, Drip from
Mhm.
2020. I actually do rate this one just a little bit higher than Hippopotamus even.
Mhm.
Um, it's got things like, I mean, All That is still a song that they play in concert all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
Lawnmower is wonderful, as is I'm Toast. Um, Pacific Standard Time. I love Stravinsky's Only Hit. I mean, I just
yeah,
love the
yeah,
idea of Stravinsky having a
yeah,
hit record.
yeah,
Um, and of course, again, it finishes up with there's a bit of language on this album that they haven't really used before, like on the song iPhone,
yeah,
and then on the end track, please don't bleep up my world.
yeah,
So, that
yeah.
it's
I
again,
remember when that song first came out or was being talked about on Facebook. And there was this woman Sparks fan, and she was so offended by the title that she quit, she quit the group or whatever, like
Yeah,
just over one word. I'm
I don't know.
offended.
Yeah, some people are easily offended by language, but I mean, I think that song really needed to have that kind of language
Yeah,
in it
yeah,
because, it's not often that Sparks get really serious with their lyric, you
yeah,
know. And that song really is a serious lyric about,
yeah,
let's stop destroying the planet sort of thing,
yeah.
So,
And then all that, the opening song, it was like almost like a ballad, and once again serious and kind of
mm,
endearing. Really, really good for a concert closer too.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. All right, we're into the top five now.
Yeah. Is it my turn?
Yes, it is.
Oh, I'm curious if you're going to even have this on your list. But once again, a big change in their sound. And I was worried until I heard the album because Sparks were going disco, number
Yeah.
one in heaven. But it was way beyond disco. So I loved it right away. And Russell still had used his falsetto sometimes, and uh, and not a drum machine, a real drummer on the album. And uh, yeah, absolutely one of my favorites. And I love the album cover too.
Yeah.
Very different from what they would usually do.
Okay. You wonder if that one's on my list.
Yeah.
Wonder no more. It is my number five.
Yeah.
Giorgio Moroder is one of my favorite sort of artists from the 70s. He gets called disco, and I suppose there is that sort of disco thing because, Donna Summer and all that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
I think of him more as an electronic artist.
Hmm.
And I love electronic music, especially from the late 70s, early 80s. And Sparks, of course, put their own spin on it. Uh, this doesn't sound like any other Giorgio Moroder record from the same period because you've got Ron and Russell on there. You've got brilliant tracks like Tryouts for the Human Race,
Yeah.
which just absolutely brilliant. Beat the Clock was actually got some airplay here in Australia.
Hmm.
Um,
Wow.
yeah. And Number One Song in Heaven, again, that is a song that they have to play every time they do a show because
Yeah.
that's when Ron gets up and does his little dance.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, no, it's an absolute Sparks classic as far as I'm concerned. Love it to
Yeah.
bits.
Yeah. All right. My number four. Now, this used to be quite often number one, but it's just they have so many good albums.
Mm,
So it has fallen to number four. It is Indiscreet. And once again, a little different than Kimono My House and Propaganda, a lot more variety in it. But once again, I loved it right away when I bought it back in 1975.
yeah. I mean, produced by
And
Tony
probably one of their
Visconti.
best productions too with
Yeah.
Tony Visconti.
Yeah. It's a different album. They sort of going back into the like, pre-rock and roll, pre-pop, with things like Looks, Looks, Looks
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. Um, yeah, that one actually didn't make my top 10, but if I was doing a longer list, it probably would have been number 11. So
Yeah.
it's a really good album. It is unlike anything else in their catalog. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
My number four is going to be their album from 2002, and that is Little Beethoven. Again, this was such a drastic change for them. You know,
Yeah.
they'd done before this, they had the album Balls, which was again more of that sort of really techno European disco sound. And I felt like there's songs on there that I love. I actually have grown to like that album a bit better than
Yeah.
I used to.
But at that point when it did come out, I think what you're trying to say too is it was kind of getting a little monotonous. It was getting tiring. Oh, more of this, right?
Yeah,
Even
exactly.
though,
That's
like you
exactly
said
what I'm
later
getting
on,
at.
it is a really good album. But
Yeah. That's exactly what I'm getting at. It was
Yeah,
like a bit more of the samey.
yeah,
And this was a complete departure. You
yeah,
know, this sort of really chamber pop, almost no percussion on this album. And when there is, it's more sort of orchestral production, percussion. You know, there's a lot of orchestral sounds on this, although they're played on like keyboard by Ron. There's a lot of repetition in this album, but it's done to create a sort of a almost a hypnotic kind of feeling. It's not monotonous at all. It's hypnotic,
yeah,
especially when you get a song like My Baby's Taking Me Home, where
yeah,
apart from like this monologue at the sort of second half of it, the only lyric in the song is My Baby's Taking Me Home.
yeah,
And
yeah,
yet they build and build and build on it musically until it becomes this absolute almost a fugue, you know.
yeah.
Um, but you've got the Rhythm Thief, you've got How Do I Get to Carnegie Hall, you know, that wonderful old joke. They've turned that
Yeah,
into a song.
yeah,
Um, I Married Myself, you
yeah.
know, a really bizarre lyric, but a really beautiful song musically.
Well,
Um,
earlier Ron was falling in love with himself again, right? So
mm,
he finally married himself.
yeah. Um, And then you get, probably the one rock kind of song on here is Ugly Guys with Beautiful Girls.
Yeah,
Um, you know, it ain't done with smoke and mirrors.
yeah,
And then Suburban Homeboy to finish it off. I mean, to me, top to bottom, every song on this album is just wonderful.
yeah.
And the whole sound of it, as I say, such a departure from what they'd done the last couple of albums. I know some people can't sort of get into this album because of the sort of
Hmm.
repetition in the
Hmm.
lyrics and that sort of thing. But to me, as I say, it just really builds up this wonderful sort of hypnotic kind of feel. And the music on it is just so brilliant.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's my number four is Little Beethoven.
yeah. Yeah, I love like even if I don't show some of the albums you showed, I still love them.
Mm,
You can only squeeze 10 into the top 10.
exactly.
So number three, you might have seen this album cover before at some point.
Yes.
Yeah. I would say the only, it's not even a negative, but I would say side one is probably one of their strongest sides. And side two is maybe just a tad weaker with In My Family and Complaints. But otherwise, Here in Heaven, one of my favorite Spark songs. And of course, This Town Ain't Big Enough for Both of Us. And Thank God It's Not Christmas. So it's number three for me.
Well, it's also number three for me. So
Oh, it's not
it's
number one. We're
no,
doing something different.
it would be a lot of people's number one, I think.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
this was my very first Sparks album. Um, I unlike you, I've only gotten into Sparks in the last sort of 8, 10 years. And I was kind of recommended them by my younger sister. And I saw there was a copy of this album being sold by someone on like we had this little app and website called Gumtree. It's like a classifieds kind of
yeah.
um and they were advertising that they had records and this was one of them. I actually picked up Peter Gabriel's Passion at the same time as well.
Hmm.
But I brought this album home, I listened to it, and by the end of side one, I was like, where has this band been all my life?
Yeah,
And I had to basically, it was from there on, it was like I had to collect every Sparks album from there on.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I mean, this town ain't big enough for the both of us. I mean, number two hit in the UK. Amateur Hours, wonderful. Falling in love with myself again. Here in Heaven. Thank God it's not Christmas. Yeah, that side one may just be the greatest side they ever put out. But I agree
yeah,
with you. It is a bit of a front-loaded album.
yeah, yeah.
Although I do like Hasta Manana Monsieur. That's really
I
hard to
was gonna
say.
say it, but then I said, forget it, I'm gonna struggle.
Yeah. And Talent is an Asset is great.
That's really good.
Equator's
Yeah,
not a bad closing song.
Yep.
But yeah, Complaints and In My Family probably are what just keep this from being number one.
Yeah.
But it's a brilliant album, and you can see why in the UK this was a hit. This was the sort of thing that UK audiences were really into at the time. And the funny thing is that I don't think the band themselves were convinced that This Town Ain't Big Enough for Both of Us was going to be a huge hit, but Muff Winwood, their
Right.
producer, was dead sure. So
Yep. 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 All right. My number two is the follow-up, Propaganda.
nice.
And yeah, I think that this is just more consistent throughout. It's just between the two, it's a stronger album. Uh yeah, I love everything about it, including the cover.
Yeah, it's a great cover.
Yeah, yeah.
My number two is going to be their album from 1982, which is Angst in My Pants. Again, this is they're very much in their new wave mode. And they're sort of like the band with uh their backup musicians there as well.
Yep. Yep.
Um to me, this is the best of their sort of those new wave albums that they did in the early to mid 80s. Although I love all of them, I could have
Yep.
easily had, Pulling Rabbits Out of a Hat or In Outer Space in this top 10 as well, because I think they're both great albums.
Hmm.
But this one, I mean, the title track to lead it off, I predict great single, should have been a big hit.
Yeah.
Um, and I love the fact that, that he's making all these predictions, and then the last one is that the song will fade out,
Yeah.
and it doesn't. It comes to a
Yeah.
full
Yeah.
stop. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
Sextown USA is absolutely a hilarious rave up.
Yeah.
Um, Sherlock Holmes, I really like. Mickey Mouse, fun.
Yep.
Um, yeah, probably Tarzan and Jane is not my favorite song on the album, but Eaten by the Monster of Love, I love that
Yep.
song to death. The Decline and Fall of Me, as you said, really good song. Mustache, a classic. I mean, is Ron Mael the only man who has ever written a song about his own mustache?
Possibly.
So that's my number two, Angst in My Pants.
I think I
Number
know what your
one.
number one is.
Yeah.
Uh, I won't give it away.
Mm.
My number one,
Ooh.
yeah, it's I have played this probably three times more than Hippopotamus or A Steady Drip Drip Drip. And just in the last few listens, it's like, you know what? This is their best album because I think it's their most. I think one of the things that really helps it too is it's a bit shorter.
Mm.
It's only, I think, what, like a regular album. It's
Yeah.
not as. I think the only downfall with the other two recent albums is just too many songs. Like they could have maybe cut a couple out of them. But this one, I think, is just so strong from start to finish. So it's my number one.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a great album. It's one that I think I didn't appreciate when it first came out. I didn't think it was
Hmm.
quite up there with Hippopotamus and the Steady Drip Drip Drip. But seeing the songs in concert, I think helped me with that. Um, I think sometimes that happens.
Hmm.
There are certain bands where I didn't really like them until I saw them live.
Yeah.
And this album, I think, is like that.
Yeah.
It's like I thought it was good, but I didn't think it was as good as the previous couple. But
Yep.
then seeing it live, I think it's almost up there. As I
Yeah.
say, it didn't quite make my top 10, but
Yep.
it's a really good album, and it continues that sort of late career renaissance that they've been on, which
Yeah.
is just incredible when you think that these guys are in their mid to late 70s and they're still cranking out like top quality albums.
Yeah.
It's really quite amazing. And yes, I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you, or indeed many of my viewers, to know that my number one is Propaganda.
Yeah.
Um, to me, this is the perfect Sparks album. You know, it starts off with that wonderful title track, which is just sort of a cappella. And then it gets probably my single favorite Spark song, which is At Home, At Work, At Play. Um, I could listen to that. It's one of those few songs that I could just listen to on repeat
Yep.
because there's just so much in a 3.5 or however long it is minute song. There's so much going on in there. You know, some of my viewers who are, into my sort of progressive rock content, there's a bit of a proggy feel to that song, with all these little sort of counter melodies and stuff going on in it. Um, but yeah, I mean, just so many other great songs on this album. To me, it's the perfect Sparks
Yeah.
album.
Yep.
So that's my number one.
Yep.
So there you have it, everyone. That is our Sparks top 10. As you could see, there were a few things in common, but there was a lot quite different as well. And that's because this is such an incredibly consistent catalog. And I think, Larry, you'd agree with me there.
Yep. Yep.
So, Larry, thank you so much for joining me for this one. It's been an absolute pleasure. If
You're
there's
welcome.
anybody in my audience who's not already subscribed to Canadian Studmuffin, and I'd find that very difficult to believe, but
I know.
if there isn't, please, I will leave a link in the description. Please go and subscribe to Canadian Studmuffin. Please do like, share, and subscribe here. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted, so if you want to see any of my other studio albums rank shows, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see some of my favorite albums of all time shows, I have a playlist for those. And if you want to see my appearances on other people's channels, like the aforementioned Canadian Studmuffin, where we did a wonderful show on Paul McCartney underrated songs,
Yep.
I also have a playlist for those. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at bicyclelegs on Instagram and Twitter, and I have a dedicated Bicycle Legs Facebook page as well. Links are all in the description. Please come and give those all a follow and join in the conversation. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.